There's a haunted house on Sherman. No, that's usually where they put a Hallelujah house, disguised as a haunted house. Yeah, that's true. There's a pumpkin patch on 8th. What are we, 5? Well, let's see. Oh, there's a corn maze. It's supposed to be pretty good, too. Really good reviews. I sat behind the wheel of my Explorer, finally shrugging. It's better than nothing, I guess. Mark and John pulled out their phones and started looking up reviews. Peter put the address into my phone, pointing off towards the farmland and saying, "Onward to the corn maze." I pulled out of the parking lot and headed out, the sun sinking on the horizon already. Moran wasn't what you would call a cultural mecca. It was a rural farming community with a lot of dairy and poultry farms, as well as the usual acres and acres of produce. For a place with only one Walmart and 3 stoplights, there sure seemed to be a lot of churches with a staggering amount of influence. The town had a lot of kiddie carnivals, fall fairs, and church socials, but there weren't any of the usual things around Halloween, like haunted houses or spooky attractions. You had to be very critical of the ones you did get, because most of them turned out to be Hallelujah houses, and you were more likely to get a sermon than a scare. This corn maze, however, sounded like just what we were after. All the reviews I've found say it's a spooky good time, Peter said. John made a whistling sound. And the cost is pretty reasonable, too. $5 a head, and the money goes to farmland preservation, whatever that is. Preserving farmland, clearly, Peter said, rolling his eyes. Says it's been operating for a while. Wonder why we've never heard of it. Maybe we just weren't looking for it, I said, driving past the city limits as we entered the farmland. The farmland lives up to its name in almost any season. There's always a riot of growing things, fields of produce or orchards of apples and pears. There were pecans as well, grape vineyards, a lot of barns and grazing land for cows, sheep, horses, and any number of other livestock. The fields today were mostly full of pumpkins and corn, typical crop for the season, and we passed more than one pumpkin patch in full swing. The setting sun would send many of them home with their prizes, but for us, the night would hopefully bring plenty of thrills and chills. The farm in question, the Lazy Stalk, was not one I was familiar with, but there were so many farms out here that it wasn't out of the question that I'd missed one. My brothers and I often spent our summers working at the Flying J or the Quarter Moon, but there were more farms than farmers out here these days. The idea of starting fresh with about 50 acres and some seeds was appealing as the world slowly went to hell around us. But most of the new farms closed up shop when they realized that there was more to it than plowing and growing and selling. The Lazy Stalk, the sign bearing a grinning pumpkin and a leaning cornstalk, didn't seem new, but that didn't mean anything. New or old, the corn maze they boasted was absolutely massive. We pulled into the little dooryard, a dirt track with several cars already parked in it, and I could see a fellow in overalls who looked like a caricature of some Midwestern farmer. His overalls were denim, the pant legs rolled up to the ankles, and his bare feet seemed to be part of the muddy ground at the edge of the field. Behind him rose the corn, tamed through some dark magic into a maze, and as we approached the man, I heard him whistling something around a bit of straw perched in his mouth, the knife he was using to carve the wood in his hand sliding against the shape with delicious repetition. "Really leaning into that Cornhusker vibe, ain't he?" Mark asked sidemouth, and John elbowed him as if to say, "Be polite." "Hey there," I said as we approached. "We're here for the corn maze," he asked, around the slip of straw. The wood shavings fell from the piece he was carving, and I became quite certain it was a pumpkin. The stem was beginning to form from the top, and he had already made the face. The grinning mouth seemed to think about biting, and the eyes were full of malicious glee as they looked out at us. Nope, we're here for the ambience, Mike said, in his best Northwestern accent, and John elbowed him again. Yes, sir, I said, pulling out my wallet, as he put the finishing touches on the pumpkin and set it aside. Hey, could I buy that? I asked, suddenly moved to own it. Couldn't tell you why. It wasn't a particularly amazing carving, but I found myself wanting it, and my question elicited a smile from the old codger. 20 for the group, he said, his veined hands reaching up towards the pumpkin before holding it out shakily. But the pumpkin is free. Take it with my thanks. It's been a while since anyone admired my carving. And likely to be, Mark began, but John shot him another preemptive elbow. We paid our money, and when the man handed me the pumpkin, I saw he had threaded a leather piece through it. It was a necklace now, it seemed, and I slipped it on without too much thought. I thought it was kind of cool, and we went inside, the old man wishing us luck, as we came into an immediate crossroads. Right or left, boys? I asked, and after some speculation, it was decided that left was our destination. We headed deeper into the maze, expecting to find some spooky decor or even someone in a costume, but it was just corn as far as the eye could see. We took turns at random, alternating between right and left, and the deeper we went, the more sure we were that this would be the turn where we found something. A guy in a costume with a chainsaw, a bunch of body parts or gravestones, an animatronic thing that would flash and scare us all half to death, but nothing came. We went from excitedly chattering to quietly walking, the sound of our feet against the dry corn stalks, the only sound. Would that it had stayed that way. We had taken our 10th turn, the sun setting behind the wall of corn and making a shadowy corridor for us to tromp through, when we heard the whistling. It sounded like it was coming from the path ahead of us at first, but pretty soon I saw Peter turn his head so we could look behind us. Other times it seemed to come from the row beside us or from further in the maze, only to circle us like a vulture, before fading to something nearly inaudible again. Okay, you guys hear that, right? John asked, wincing as his foot came down on a particularly loud bit of corn husk. Hear it? It's kind of impossible to miss, Mark said. You think this is the big scary thing? Peter asked, squinting up at the setting sun. If this is what has so many people freaked out, then I'm not impressed. He said it offhandedly, but I didn't believe him. I knew I was a little freaked out by the whistling, but I couldn't really explain why. It felt the way I imagined a bug would feel in your ear, the legs of the whistler scuttling around, trying to find purchase as they raked across my mind. It made me anxious in a way that nothing else ever had, and the deeper into the maze we went, the more I wondered how much deeper we would have to go. How long had we even been walking? Felt like it could have been hours, but it also felt like it could have been mere moments. We kept going, what choice did we have? And the further we went, the more the whistling chased us. It wasn't even whistling any particular tune. It was disconcerting, from one note to the next, and it seemed as if several songs were going on simultaneously. I felt the whistling in my eardrums, in my bones, in my soul. It made me feel like I might be going insane. I didn't know who was whistling or how they made it sound like that, but I certainly didn't want to meet them. The sun was riding low when I caught my first sight of the whistling man, and it was something I could have done without. We came to what had to be the center of the maze, a huge four-way intersection that had been cut like a compass. If we were standing at the southern point, then he was at the northern point, directly across from us. The sun cut a shadow across him as it set lower and lower, but I could still see his long coat, his tall, wide-brimmed hat, and the rags that hung about him, and the darkness that existed within the space between. From beneath the brim of that hat was a single red eye, its reflection seeming to glow as the light of the sun waned, and when he moved off down the long corn corridor, I felt like I could breathe again. "Did you guys see that?" I whispered, but apparently no one else had seen anything. "What?" Peter asked, glancing around, Mark and John following his lead. There was a guy at the end of the road in a big coat." "I didn't see anything," John said. "You sure you aren't—" But he winced when the whistling picked back up again. "Damn it! If this whistling is all there is to it, then I wish they would just get on with it already. It isn't scary," he yelled, clearly trying to get the whistler's attention. "It's just annoying." If the whistler cared or heard, it never let on. It just kept right on whistling as we made our way through the corn, trying to find a way out. We had yet to find a dead end, so we assumed that we must be going the right way, but the corn seemed to go on forever. It couldn't be this large. We had traveled miles, but every turn led to more and more tightly packed stalks, and every mile led to more whistling. The sun got lower and lower, and when it finally set, the maze was plunged into near darkness. I don't think we had realized just how dark it could get out here. Most people used to living with streetlights don't, but with only the sickle moon to light our path, we were plunged into a nearly supernatural darkness, and it seemed to hang around us as much as the whistling. The darkness had done nothing to quell the terrible whistling in the maze, and as we moved slowly through the rows, it circled us like a pack of hungry dogs. "Shouldn't he have come out to get us?" Pete said, his voice pitched low as if afraid something would hear him. I don't know," John said, his teeth chattering as we moved in a clump. The whistling swirled around, rising and falling as it moved ahead, behind, and around us. "If he's doing that, then I wish he'd fucking stop," Mark yelled, his good humor lost. "It's just whistling," I whispered, not sure I wanted to raise my voice either. "It can't hurt us." I said it, but I didn't believe it. "You're wrong," someone said, and I was surprised to see it was John, not Mark. "And if we aren't very lucky, you'll be dead wrong." The whistling was eroding them, making their terror seem like more than it should be, and it didn't take long for us to start breaking. Paul swung his head around, John began to shake, his teeth chattering, and Mark balled his hands up beside him, shaking with rage the further he went. As for me, I felt my terror settling over me like a warm blanket, shuddering in my bones as that whistling clattered around me like jangling bells. Mark was unfortunately the first one to break. "Stop it!" he shouted, looking around as if someone might come out to challenge him. "I can't take it anymore! Show yourself!" he demanded. And when something snapped ahead of us, he charged away from the group towards the sound. "Mark, don't!" I screamed, but he was already charging away and heading into the unknown. I grabbed John as he ran after him, begging him to stay with us, and the screams that came from farther up froze all of us in our tracks. Whatever was making that maddening whistling had gotten Mark, and it didn't sound like it was doing anything good to him. His screams arced up and over the corn, sending birds into flight from the stalks before petering off to silence. The whistling started just as the crickets began to tune up again. "To hell with this," John stammered, running off the way we'd come. Peter ran in the other direction, the way that Mark had, and I was forced to make a choice. Peter and I had been friends since kindergarten, meeting on our very first day, and if I had to go with one of them, I decided it would be him. We were both running then, neck and neck, and as we sprinted through the maze, the whistling filled our ears like wasps. If John met the same fate as Mark had, I didn't hear him scream. We ran until we were both out of breath. We kept running till the stitch in our sides burned, and as we toppled over in the field of green, I heard the whistling getting closer and closer. We were both sitting with our backs against the corn wall, as the man I had seen before came shuffling around the corner, his head almost taller than the maze itself. He whistled as he walked, stalking forward as he came towards us. His hands were living shadows, his one red eye glaring evilly, and as he latched one of those hands around Peter's ankle, I saw the other coming for me. Peter screamed as he yanked him back, dragging him into the field, but that hand seemed to falter when it came to me. He cocked his head, leaning in bonelessly as he looked at the pumpkin on my chest. I'd forgotten I was wearing it, the little wooden trinket picked up at the start of this nightmare. And he shook his head and grunted before speaking in a harsh, raspy voice. "Shame. I was hoping for a bigger meal today." Then he dragged Peter off as I lay there, shivering and weeping as that whistling came to me from the inhuman creature that had taken my friends. That's where they found me, half out of my mind and crying in a fetal ball. I'd been missing for 2 days, and when the cops spotted my SUV in the dooryard of the old farmhouse, they had come out with dogs and found me curled up in the old field behind the farmhouse, laying amongst the few skeletal corn husks. I told them my friends and I had come out to the corn maze, the lazy stalk, and how the old farmer had taken our money and wished us good luck. The cop I was talking to said that particular farm had been abandoned for years, but I wasn't the first kid to come spouting stories about a weird corn maze, an old whittling farmer, and a whistling creature. You'd be about the fourth in as many years, actually. Can't speak for the other two, but the last one was wearing one of those little pumpkins, too," he said, indicating my necklace. "The hunt continues for my friends, but I bear a strange sort of survivor's guilt. I watched Peter get snatched. I did nothing while John and Mark ran off, and somehow this carving saved me. Whatever happened, I fear I may never understand it. But one thing keeps me teetering on the edge of sanity. When I walk the streets, when I lay in bed at night, when I drive to the store, or when I sit alone with my thoughts, I hear the whistling. It's low, thoughtful, utterly discordant. I'm afraid of what'll happen when it gets louder. Afraid of the whistler who makes that sound. And I haven't been without my pumpkin charm since the incident. Whatever charm it holds may be the only thing keeping me from joining my friends." "You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.